Good luck. See you later. 2 big fat passes, please. When I did the CB500F review, I promised a review on the MT07. So I'm here at the test centre. Got a couple of students going out on test, which leaves me with about an hour to go out and have a play and to give you my view on the Yamaha MT07. This is the 2017 model. We use the 2017 model because of its lovely narrow seat. The newer ones have a wider, fatter seat, which is a benefit to most people because it's more comfortable. You can see how thin and narrow this seat is. And the thinness makes it a little bit like a plank when you're sitting on it for a long period of time, which isn't particularly comfortable. But I still stand by the fact that once you've ridden a bike for long enough, your bottom gets used to it and you develop your sitting bones. The newer bikes are a disadvantage for the shorter riders amongst us because they are wider, so it means you can't reach the floor so easily. So I'm 5'2" and I find this very easy to reach the floor on both sides. I think I'm flat-footed on both sides actually on this bike, probably also because we've lowered it using some lowering links so that our shorter riders who are learning to ride find it easier as well. I'm sorry it's not the cleanest example, it is a little bit gutty because it's been out training all week. Still a very good looking bike for a 2017 model. It's 5 years old, I suppose 6 years old now, but still looking nice and new and not looking outdated. I really do like these bikes for the amount of low down grunt and torque that they have. So compared to the CB500F, it's got more power lower down and it feels faster, probably because it is faster. Remember, the 500 is the A2 restricted bike, so it has to come in at less than 46 brake horsepower, whereas these bikes are up there in the 94, 95 brake horsepower bracket. I can't remember exactly what it is. You can look them up if you want to know the exact specifications. But it does make it more powerful, and it really does go when you want it to. That's not to say that the 500 doesn't, you just have to work it a little bit harder to get the power out of it, which makes it quite fun to ride. But this is naturally faster without having to try as hard. The MT07 has a plastic tank, so you need to be aware of that. If you want to get yourself a tank bag, it's going to have to be one that fits onto the fuel tank or has those straps that fit round. I'm never quite sure how they work, but I believe there are ones that have straps that you then attach through. Or maybe a tail pack would be better, or a top box. One of my biggest complaints with the MT07 has always been the mirrors. Always found it very difficult to set these mirrors up without losing about this much of the mirror to my elbows. And that's the case again today. So it's quite difficult to see what you want to see in the mirrors without having lots of elbow in there or having to do this to then actually see what you want to see in the mirrors if you've managed to get your elbows out of the mirrors. So it would help Yamaha if you made your mirrors more along the lines of the Hondas, because the Hondas are bigger, squarer and taller. And I don't know whether it's to do with the angle of these mirror mounts as well, but the Honda ones are just generally better. So the CB650s that we've got over there are much, much better, especially if you are broad shouldered. The broader students definitely find them much better for seeing, and I find it very easy to see in those mirrors because I'm not particularly broad. So that's my biggest gripe. What's the second thing that I don't like as much with this bike? It's the suspension. The rear suspension especially is quite harsh. Both the suspension and the hardness of the seats make the Yamaha MT07 far less comfortable to ride than the CB500F and the CB650Rs. The CB650Rs, which are over there, don't know if you can see them, but they're there, waiting to go out on test, are very, very smooth and comfortable in terms of suspension, both front and rear. The CB500 is equally comfortable, just in a different way. It doesn't feel the same as the 650Rs, but it's definitely more comfortable than the MT07. The MT07 seat is also quite slippy, so when you're riding along you find yourself slipping in towards the tank, which is a little bit uncomfortable. You have to keep readjusting yourself every now and then. So there's the bits that I don't like. Well, let's now go for a ride and find all the bits that I do like, because I really do like this bike. It's a very, very fun little bike to ride, and it's very easy to ride, especially at slow speeds, which is one of the reasons that we use them for our training bikes. Coming in at 180 kilograms, they're very light, very nimble, and very quick. Superb little bikes to learn to ride on. And quite a number of our students have gone on to buy them, having learned to ride on them initially. So over the years, they've been a very popular bike as a training school bike, and with new riders. I don't know if the microphone will pick this up, but anybody who's ridden a Yamaha knows about the large clunk that you get when you put it down into first gear. And in general, the Yamaha gearbox is nowhere near as smooth to use as the Honda gearbox is. It just doesn't feel smooth with your foot on the gear lever. You can feel notchy bits in there. This bike has done about 58 to 60,000 miles, and I don't know if that's part of the reason that the gearbox is a little bit notchy in the feeling, or if it's always been that way, and I can't remember. But I do know that the Yamaha gearboxes have always been more clunky than the Honda gearboxes. Having ridden a Yamaha TDM 900 for a few years, it just feels different with your foot. What Mr. Lerner's doing, a little bit of parky. Listen as we put it down into first gear. Poof. First it is. The clutch is quite heavy on these bikes compared to the Hondas. Now, I didn't know that the Yamahas had quite heavy clutches until I rode the Hondas. That's not to say that it's unrideable or unpleasant, it's just a slightly heavier clutch than the Hondas provide. Now, if you have weak hands, the Hondas are going to be better for you. But if you don't have weak hands, you probably wouldn't even notice that this feels heavier once you're used to it. The only time we really notice the heaviness of the clutch is if we're doing lots of slow speed riding. And for most riders, that would be in slow moving traffic. Whereas obviously for learners, we're doing quite a lot of your slow speed practice, which can possibly result in hand ache for those who've got the weaker hands, or those who are just building up their muscles as they haven't ridden before and built those muscles. Some people struggle with the indicator button on these bikes, but for me, once you've found where it is, I find it's quite an easy one to operate, so long as you're positive with the switching. So don't flick the indicator button, use it like a switch. Make sure you have positively switched it over to where you want it to be. And these bikes, it's a common fault with MT07s, they don't like to go into neutral once they're warm. So if you raise the revs up, it'll slip in really easily. So just raise the revs, hold them, and then pop it down into neutral whilst you're holding the revs. It'll slide in nice and easy for you. When you use the Yamaha keys, they're sprung loaded. So we tell every student that when you put the key in, you push it in and let go, and then it'll turn really easily. If you don't do the push in and let go, it won't want to turn easily, and you're more likely to bend your key. And these keys are quite narrow and spindly. They're quite easy to bend or potentially snap. So when you're doing your ignition key, put it in, push it in, let go, and then use fingertip pressure only to turn the key itself. And that way your key will always work in your ignition and your fuel cap, whereas if you force the key and wrestle with it, you're far more likely to bend it and or break it. Okie dokie, let's go for a ride. There goes my student on test. Good luck, Connor. Boof, we're in first. Let's go. The brakes are especially good on the MT07s. The Yamaha brakes are stonkingly good. The front brake is especially sharp and powerful, very effective. So you do need to be very smooth and gentle with it. So I always describe it to students as gently stroke and then gently squeeze. And then when you ease off the brake, gently ease off and push that lever away rather than just letting go. If you're smooth with these brakes, then the ride will be lovely and smooth. If you're not smooth, it won't be smooth because of how sharp the brakes are. The rear brake is also very, very effective. It's sharper than the Honda rear brakes. Honda rear brakes are a little bit softer. They do a really good job, but they're just less sharp. And it's the same with the front brakes. The Honda brakes are just a little less sharp. on the input. You can apply them sharply, but it won't have exactly the same input as if you did it on these Yamahas. These are especially sharp. Nice early second. Let's use a bit of the power. Lovely. It's got lots of power low down, and I really like that in a bike. I'm very much a twin engine sort of person. Some people prefer your inline fours. To me, they're just noisy and revvy, and I'm not a great fan of inline fours. That said, I do like the CB650R, because overall it's a wonderful bike to ride. I just get a little bit fed up with the noise. I'm not a great fan of noisy bikes anymore. I used to be. I used to have very loud Beowulf exhausts on my TDM 900, and I was really proud to be a noisy biker. But now I just get fed up with the sound of it, and I like a bit of peace and quiet. So I like these MT07s because I can't hear anything. I can hear the engine just a little bit, but I can't hear a really loud exhaust note, and that pleases me. Perhaps because I ride so many hours in a day now, I just find the sound tiring. And maybe I'm just getting old. I'm almost 40, so it must be my age. It's got plenty of poke to it, easy to block change. Gently with the brakes, both together, mostly front, down to just the rear and down through the gears. Nice smooth stop on the rear brake. It's a really good all-round bike. So easy for your town riding, and you can have lots of fun on it when you want to. Got plenty of power to get away from traffic or go for overtakes. And it's light and nimble. My left leg is flat-footed with my knee slightly bent, so the seat height on these is stonkingly good for shorter riders, which is really confidence inspiring. Shorter riders are at quite a disadvantage with the modern bikes. All these modern bikes that seem to have the standard seat height of 800 and something. Looks like really bad surface here, so I'm just going to move over. Oh no, it's just badly patched surface. Your standard seat height of 820 or 830 is really no use to me at all. I sit on those bikes and my legs just dangle. So it's nice to have a bike where, even though it's been lowered, it doesn't matter that it's had to be lowered, but my feet are flat and my knees slightly bent. So I feel totally comfortable and confident when I'm stopping. Made a nice early decision there. If the lights were going to change, I was still going to be going through. The handling on the MT07 is lovely. You only need minute little amounts of counter steering to place the bike where you want it to go. Gentle push down on the left bar, and I'm back to where I want to be in the middle of my lane. The suspension is fine when you're going over the sort of smoother of the bumps. So at this speed I've gone over a number of bumps along the way, and it's all very fine. It's just when you get to the harsher bumps that it becomes less comfortable. It's quite harsh. You find your bottom leaving the seat sometimes, and you really have to work at keeping your arms very, very relaxed on the handlebars in order that you're not fighting the bike. Whereas if I were to compare it to the CB500F or the CB650Rs, you don't have to relax as much because the suspension is doing more of the uptake, if that makes sense. I feel with this bike I have to relax my arms so much that my arms do this when I go over the bumps, which allows the bike to do exactly what it wants to do. It's a very neutral seating position on the MT07. The foot pegs are very neutral, so they're not forwards, they're not back. I think the CB650Rs are a little sportier in terms of their foot peg positioning, and the handlebars are obviously very nice and upright. So overall it is a very neutral positioning in terms of your seating position. I do find the foot pegs are in a slightly strange place for putting your feet down, because they are almost directly beneath your knees. It's kind of where you want your leg to be, so sometimes I find my leg coming out to the left of the foot peg, which can be tricky if I'm on an off camber. Otherwise I try and put my foot in front of the foot peg, which allows me to have it a little bit further in towards the bike. As I said with the indicator button, some people find the indicator button tricky on this because it's quite small. So if I point the camera there, you can see it's quite a small button. And it's not particularly positive when you cancel. There's no real feel there for cancelling. It feels a little bit like a soft sponge. So when you cancel the indicator, it's sensible to cancel it more than once, just to be totally sure that you have actually cancelled. So I tend to push it push it again, double check, and be happy that it is cancelled. Now it can be a little bit tricky to see the indicator lights on the MT07 because they're right down here. Now the only way that I can see those is by looking down, physically moving my head. And to me that's slightly annoying because I'd like to be able to just move my eyes downwards, but when I move my eyes downwards I can see the chin piece of my helmet. When I've got the GoPro on I can't see anything. It's even quite difficult to see the speedo with the GoPro on the front of my helmet, but obviously it provides better footage for these sorts of videos. So personally, Yamaha, I would prefer that the indicator lights are at the top of the dash, not at the bottom. They're at the far bottom left and the far bottom right. It would be much better if they were higher up, or if the screen was about here instead. This bike accelerates with ease. You have to be smooth with the throttle. If you're not smooth, then the bike will be harsh with you. It's one of those bikes that won't forgive you for your mistakes, but it will mean that if you try to improve with your mistakes, you'll become a much better rider. Whereas with the Hondas, because they're quite forgiving, you can make mistakes and get away with it and think you're a better rider than you are. This bike won't let you think that you're a better rider than you are. It'll tell you how good you are, and I quite like that. It means you have to be smooth. So your throttle control needs to be smooth, your brake use needs to be smooth and gentle. Your use of the clutch definitely needs to be careful because it is a very responsive clutch. I always describe the clutch use as using millimetres of the bite point, and it's a really good way to think about it. When you want to move off, you find the very beginning of your bite point and you use millimetres more to get your balance, and then you feed that clutch out doing this with your hand rather than just that with your hand, which is what we see a lot of people doing. Not on the big bikes, because we train that out of them on the small bikes. Fuel injection is very good on the MT07. Never felt any juddering or problems at certain speeds, unlike the MT09 Tracer that I used to own, the 2015 one, which had real problems with its fuel injection. This bike doesn't. It's very happy. I'm in 5th gear at 37 miles an hour, and actually it's fine. It probably really wants to be in 4th, so we go for 4th, and it feels a little happier, but it wasn't struggling in 5th. So nicely balanced at slow speeds. It's very, very easy to keep your balance whilst looking in the other direction and planning your move off from a junction. So you're double cancelling the indicator there just to be totally sure that it's off, because it does just feel like a sponge. But turning it on and turning it off, so long as you use it like a switch, it switches on and off nice and easily. Don't flick it. Lots of people we see doing this. That's not an indicator. Well, that's not how to turn your indicator on. Switch it like a switch. Easy to come down through the gears. I'm on just the rear brake now. I'm in 1st gear, planning a lovely smooth controlled stop. A little bit of an ease off at the end of the brake, because even on the rear brake, if I were just to jam it on at the end, it would feel uncomfortable and not very smooth, because it's a very sharp brake. Like you would in the car, do a little bit of feathering off at the end of your brake, or at the end of your stop, so that it's smoother, especially if you're going to be taking pillions. Lovely to lean, beautiful, holds its line really nicely. These aren't even expensive tyres on this bike. You know, I would say the Road 5s are fantastic, but they're not Road 5s. I don't even know what these tyres are. They're not expensive ones, but it handles very, very nicely whichever tyres you put on the MT07. That's not to say the grip is as good on every single tyre that you put on. The Road 5s are particularly grippy and they do inspire you with a lot of confidence, but this bike doesn't have the Road 5s on. But it's nice to know that you don't have to stick to a particular tyre manufacturer with this bike for it to handle well. There's phenomenal engine braking, these bikes, so you do need to be careful to check your mirrors before you roll off your throttle. Because of all that torque, as soon as you roll off that throttle, it does start to slow down very quickly. Temporary speed limit today. I specifically chose this road so I'd be able to go a bit faster, but never mind. They must be doing the road repairs, which are much needed. I don't think he's doing the temporary speed limits. It's quite a windy day today, generally. And I do find that the faster you go on these MT07s, the more wind blast you get. It's certainly not as smooth as the CB650R, which are smooth all the way up to 70 miles an hour, or the CB500F, which is smooth up to about 65 miles an hour, and then it starts to buff it a little bit, and you get the vibrations through the handlebars. so easy to place the tyres where you want them to be, with just tiny inputs into your counter steering. I really like that about these bikes. I did find that when I rode the CB650R, it took a little bit more input and a little bit more management in the faster bends particularly to make the bike go exactly where you wanted it to go. It wasn't especially good at holding its line. You had to manually make it hold its line, whereas these bikes, you just do a tiny weeny bit. You can even just move your body and the bike follows. So let's give it a little bit of a blast from 4th gear. Plenty of power there. There's certainly no issues with that. Car coming. Saw the rooftop over the hedge there. And keep my tyres in too. Back up to speed. Loads of grunts. Mirrors and a bit of brakes. This is where the suspension really does need a little bit of work. It's a little bit boingy. Back up to speed. Let's go. Lovely. Such a fun little bike to ride. With the amount of engine braking that it has, just rolling off the throttle there and coming down through the gears. I wasn't using the gears to slow the bike down, but I was selecting the appropriate gear for the speed that I was reducing to by just rolling off the throttle. Now there's a difference there as well. You don't want to use the gears to slow the bike down. That's what your brakes are for. And it also isn't a very smooth ride, but with deceleration, so if I just roll off the throttle now, I'm in 6th gear, use a little bit of brakes, 5th, 4th, should be about 30 miles an hour. I can't really see my speedo, but that felt like 30. So it was 29. That was downhill back there. I didn't get as much engine braking as I anticipated because it was downhill. Gently on the brakes, clutch is now in, down through my gears. I think that's 1st gear. Yep, having to double check again because I can't see because my GoPro's in the way. I don't feel any harsh vibrations through the handlebars on this bike at the higher speeds, which is nice. It's actually quite smooth. A quick look, even though I'm on traffic lights. Always sensible to look. Make sure there's no ambulances coming through or no one jumping the lights. This is quite a bumpy road and it's not especially comfortable on this bike. It's quite hard to talk when you're going over the bumps. Quite a good test for it. I think this is one of the bikes that I would own, but I would have to upgrade the suspension. I don't think I could live with this suspension if this was my only bike. That's not to say that other people mind the suspension, it's just I'm quite picky, especially as I ride a lot. A bit too bumpy. It's the front and the rear that's a little harsh, to be honest. So perhaps some different springs in the forks, and definitely a better spring on the back, maybe a different unit. Certainly more wind blast on this than on the CB650R. The 650R's got much smoother airflow around the rider, but it's still great fun to ride. Plus it's not screaming at me. There's no harsh exhaust notes. Really good brakes. Once you've started braking, you can really squeeze these levers and get some proper braking done. Actually sounds really nice, the engine, even though it's done 60,000 miles. It sounds very sweet. Feels good. The gear changes on the way up are actually very smooth. I think you only really feel the clunkiness at slower speeds coming down through the gearbox. I am really fighting with this suspension though. It's quite difficult to talk when your bum's leaving the seat, as you feel like you're going to shout. Lovely and nimble. 50 miles an hour and it just feels like you're going 30 with how nimble and easy it is to move around. Looking over the top of the hedge, anticipating there might be a car coming around here that I can't see, so I'm just going to keep it to the left. Lovely. Very easy to place the tyres where you want them to be to keep yourself safe, which is nice. Oops, I thought I was in 5th coming down to 4th then. I was quite happy to be in 4th rather than 3rd. I'm not a great fan of high revving bikes, or revving bikes highly within the rev range. I'm quite happy to be in the higher gears with them in the lower rev range. For me that's more comfortable and it's smoother as well. Not to the extent that the engine's struggling, just so that it's not catching the throttle as you go over bumps. Expect to stop whilst preparing to go. Bumps. Ugh. Apart from the jarring bumps, it's a lovely bike to ride. It's very easy to handle, it's got loads of power and poke for lots of fun. Even I can push this around without pulling a muscle or struggling with it being so light, and it's especially easy to ride slowly. I can see why so many of our learners in the past have gone on to buy these Yamahas when they've learnt on them, and some more recently as well. So as a more direct comparison, it would be better to compare this to the new CB750 Honda Hornet, because it's got a very similar feel to it in terms of the power, rather than the CB650, which is an inline 4, which feels totally different compared to this. It's got loads of lovely low down grunt, which is really enjoyable. And it's the same on the 750 Hornet that Honda have just brought out. Really enjoyable fun bike to ride, but with similar issues with the suspension. Now, this is the 2017 model of the Yamaha MT07, so it's very possible and highly likely that the later models have already got upgraded suspension. I do believe they have. I know the front suspension is different on the newer models, or at least the handlebar mounts are. These handlebars are rubber mounted, and on the newer ones they're not. And I think that had something to do with improving the handling and the suspension. So it'd be worth doing a bit of research if you're thinking about buying an MT07 as to which model is better to ride. But it's interesting that the new Honda Hornet 750 I found to be very harsh with its suspension, very similar to this, which is the older Yamaha. I was quite surprised at how harsh the suspension was on the Honda Hornet, especially as it's so good on the CB650R, and the Hornet's the newer bike of the two. Lovely brakes, great feel, very very effective, but still possible to stop nice and smoothly. And when you put the effort in, the power delivery under acceleration is very smooth, and it's quite linear. So I found with the CB500, you felt like you hadn't got much grunt until you got into the higher revs, and then all of a sudden it felt like it wanted to go, almost like it had a little turbo hiding in there. Whereas with this, it's a very linear increase in your power and acceleration all the way through, which if anything makes it a bit more predictable. You keep having to shift my bottom back in the seat though, because it's a bit slip-slidey. Apart from the indicators being right at the bottom of the dash, which makes it quite hard for me to see them, the rest of the dash is very organised and well laid out and very easy to see. In terms of clarity and colour definition, you've got a very clear fuel gauge on the left. You can also get quite a lot of miles out of one tank of fuel. I can't remember what the capacity of the tank is, but it's definitely up there with 170, 180 miles, if not upwards of that, per tank, depending on how you ride it, of course, which makes it a fun and economical bike to ride, which is a little bit unusual sometimes. Nice, easy to read, gear indicator right in the middle, and lovely big speedo. Don't really need anything else on the dash. It's got an eco sign on it, which presumably is telling you that you're in the correct gear for riding economically. And the revs, of course, along the bottom. You can choose what else you want to display on there, so you can have air temperature, you can have your trip meter, your overall mileage, etc. There's no modes on this bike, it is what it is. It's a great bike. We've fitted standard Oxford heated grips to it to improve the rider comfort during the lessons. It makes such a difference to riding in winter time. I'm just going to drop into the car park to show you a little bit of slow speed stuff. So riding this bike slowly is an absolute doddle. Easy peasy. The clutch is more springy than the clutches on the Hondas, by which I mean it's got more resistance to it. So through the bike point, it's resisting your hand more. So when we say a clutch feels light, which the Hondas are very light, when you go to take the clutch through, it's really, really easy. It's ever so light. It doesn't feel heavy. This has a much stronger spring resistance to it, which makes us say that it feels heavy. It actually makes it quite easy to ride slowly with a heavy clutch, because you can really control the millimetres of the clutch coming out, because you've got more resistance against your fingers. They've got wonderful balance, they're lovely and light, they're very, very easy to ride slowly. There's John giving a lesson. If you totally relax, you can turn these bikes quite tightly. Nice and easy. 3 miles an hour, not even doing anything. It's just taking me for a ride. I'm not using any rear brake. Just doing a really tight, slow turn. And there we go. Slow riding. Easy peasy. Beautifully balanced. Very nice. Now you can pick these up second hand for quite a small amount of money these days. If you're on a bit of a budget, the MT07 is an excellent bike. Whether it's your first bike, a back to biking bike, or just something you fancy having a ride on. So that's the MT07 in a nutshell. I hope you found it helpful. There's lots to love about the bike, and there's a couple of little bits that I don't like so much, but it wouldn't stop me from owning one and having one as my personal bike. I just need to tweak a few little bits and bobs here and there. And for the value for money that you get, particularly if you were buying one second hand, bearing in mind that this bike particularly has done nearly 60,000 miles, and all of those miles have been done with learner riders, and it's still going strong. I think it's a very good buy, or at least one to consider if you're looking to buy a second-hand bike. I can't speak for the brand new ones because I haven't ridden a brand new one. I think we did have actually the 2021 model at one point. We had to lower them because I couldn't reach the floor. They were very nice and the suspension was better. So it might be worth trying different models and years depending on what's in your budget. But this one was the 2017 model. Lovely bike. Very reliable. Great fun to ride, very nimble. Well, that's it for now. Thank you for watching and I'll see you soon. Where's your certificate?